one evening, we visited after being to the UN. My wife and I went to the Empire State Building, and we were up on top of the Empire State Building, and I was looking out there to the north, and I said, I wondered if I could be able to reach Fred Rescall by telephone. And so I called information and gave the address, and I was able to get his phone number. So I called him up from the observation platform of the Empire State Building. Tell me, have you all ever gotten a telephone call from somebody on top of the Empire State Building? Probably doesn't happen too often, does it? Well, anyway, he was in. He was home. Now, I hadn't talked to him probably at that time. I hadn't talked to him for 10 years. And so Mr. Rescall, you'll never guess who this is. This is Bill Willis. He said, "Oh, Willis, where are you calling from?" "Well, I'm calling you from on top of the Empire State Building." Anyway, so we had a great phone conversation there. But this is, I mean, obviously, I've gone from junior high school to lieutenant colonel in the Army, so it had been a long time since he had the influence. But that's how much significance you can have on somebody. So was responsible for WLWO, which then became the Voice of America, and had all those towers up there west of Mason, Ohio. But here's a story about WLW. Workings of a half megawatt station on 700 kilohertz, and notice that the engineers, this is an audio engineer, always were dressed. They all had to wear coats and ties and so on. I mean, even the transmitter, he went from 20 to 50 to 500 to 50,000. And then the 50,000 watt transmitter was subsequently used as a driver for the half megawatt station. Can you imagine that? 50 kilowatt AM station was a driver to provide the grid current. Here's this is the audio programming section providing the audio. By the way, back in those days, you know, we had to run the audio lines over telephone wires. Well, the broadcast requirement was from 200 to 12 kilohertz. Well, you can't drive 12 kilohertz over a telephone line. And so we had to use equalizers, line equalizers. When we first went on the air in French Lick at WFLQ, we still had equalizers the telephone companies provided if you wanted to have a line that had the full audio spectrum. The AM audio was up to actually 8 kilohertz. So 200 to 8 kilohertz was the audio band in the AM. Now in FM then we went from 20 to 20,000, and that became the standard once the FM broadcast became done. Really blow the power into that line in order to get the response of the high frequencies equal to the response of the lower frequencies. And that's what they had to do back in these days in order to get enough of the high frequency audio through there. Well, back in these days we didn't have, there weren't any limiters. And a limiter automatically pulls the gain down so that on peaks it clips the peaks off. Well, they didn't have limiters back in those days, and that was made at some interesting complications with a station running a half a megawatt, even 50,000 watts, when it would hit over 100% modulation. And so we'll talk about the implication of that in a moment. This is the transmitter, the half megawatt transmitter. It's 54 feet wide. And it was really fascinating to see that in person and have an engineer who had actually operated that at a half a megawatt tell us about what it was like in the days when it operated in the 1930s. From it was 1934 through 1939, 5 years that they operated experimentally at a half a megawatt. Well, this bank here will get into some more detail of what's in there. using 898 bottles, about 5 feet tall, each one of which could handle 100,000 watts dissipation. But there were 12 of them that were in push-pull series, and then the modulator. In addition to that, you had Class C modulation. You see the modulation transformer in a minute. And down here is the operator. Notice he also has a coat on, tie. And they had to ride gain there very carefully. They actually had several people riding gain so that one person could catch something else that somebody else would miss. Because when modulation peaks, you see that a half a megawatt, you realize what a half a megawatt is equal to on a 100% modulation peak? You know what that equates to in power? Take a guess. This is AM now. Of course, it doesn't make any difference on FM. But on AM, when you modulate at 100% and you hit a peak just for an instant, that is equal to 4 times the actual PA input power. 2 megawatts. Number 2 and 6 more. 19 states. It was either number 1 or number 2 of all the radio stations. And by that time, there were, by 1936, probably 2,000 radio stations in America. Which then became the Voice of America. It became an operation after Crosby sold in World War II, following World War II. He sold his shortwave operation, which had been WLWO, to the USIA, U.S. Information Agency, which operated the Voice of America. And here was so some of you remember seeing those towers that were off of I-75 on the way to Dayton. There was a whole array of big towers not too far away from the interstate. Anybody remember seeing these towers years ago? Well, they've since been removed. But when we were up there, they were still operating this as Voice of America. Now, when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, we no longer had the need to send our information into the former Soviet Union to counter what the Soviets had been saying, which was inaccurate. That's a nice way of saying it was a lie. A lot of what they broadcast was totally out of the, it was just completely nonsense. But we had to provide a means of informing people around the world what the truth really was.